Okay, I wanted to make a short video just going over ungrading as kind of a joint process that we're going through, and to remind you this is an exploration, right? So we're trying to see how it works out. So just to remember from the reading that you all went through, these are some of the things that we can do when we're starting to think about ungrading and moving from the traditional way of grading. So what I've tried to do is think about how does this reflect with your motivation, how you're being able to complete the coursework. Also wanted to have you think about this in terms of what your career path is. So as you can see here from 108 responses over several semesters, the majority of students don't know what they want to do, or they're still exploring, and then about half the students are going into either the legal sector or the criminal justice sector. And then something to consider, there's 51 constitutions in the United States. So we start with this idea of, how come so many students get this wrong, right? If we assume that you're interested in this subject matter, we assume that you've had the prerequisites through high school and hopefully in college to be taking this class. What does it say about the process of learning in this class if this kind of fundamental question is so often incorrect? And then what we then want to do is think about the traditional grading. So in points so far, you've gotten points mostly for participating, following instructions, or based on how many right answers you got on the short quizzes. So if I were to apply the traditional bell curve model, which a lot of students weren't aware of, I wasn't aware of until a professor pointed it out to me in college. But the easiest way to think about this is that on the left-hand column, these are your scores so far. These are all the student scores ranging from 9.5 to 45.8. So 50% of the 24 students, 12 students, they automatically have to get a C in the bell curve. And you can see this is this large group of people who meet expectations. And in our class, it would range from 23 points up to 32.5 students. So they automatically go in this middle category, 50%, and they get the C. The A students would only be the 3, and it really should only be 2.5, but I'm being generous here. 3 students who have a range from 41 to 45 points. Now on the lower end, it's the same, it has to equal, right? So you have 10% at the top, 10% at the bottom, so those are the 9 to 12. The important thing to think about is this is a zero-sum game. This is a prisoner's dilemma. So the 10% have an advantage at this point. It'd be almost impossible for them to not get the A in the class at this point. They'd have to stop doing their work, they'd have to drop out of the class, something would have to happen. But this also means that the 90% below them, because they're not going to drop out and they're not going to stop doing their work, the 90% are stuck. They can't move anywhere. Now, there are very rare exceptions. So if one of these students here with 37, 37.8, or 39.7 were to drop out, then one student would able to move up, and there's a bit of competition there, somewhere between 30 and 32 points, depending on how they finish out. But very likely, the students below, 6 students are going to be stuck with the D or an F at this point already, only halfway in. So you can think about motivation and whether you'd want to cooperate with this system or whether you'd want a different system. Obviously, the 3 students at the top love this system because there's really not much more they need to do except for just maintain where they're at. And you might think about what advantages did they have coming in. Now, then there's another type that you get in other courses, which is a response-based learning. This can be on essays, long answer exams, or discussion boards. And usually the professor is using this thing called Bloom's taxonomy. So in the previous system of points, it's about remembering things. It's the bottom of this triangle. In this other response-based learning system, they're trying to see how far can you move up this triangle. So they'll usually give you an A if you're in the analyze or above category. Sometimes they'll give you a B+ if you're somewhere between the analyze and apply, but most of the time you'll get a C if you're in just the understand category, and then you'll get a D and an F if all you're doing is remembering the information but you're not able to apply it. And so this really kind of the way I think about it for if we just took our discussion boards, for example, if I was using this approach, first step is, does the student follow the directions? If they didn't follow the directions, then it's very hard for you to show that you understand. Did they use the course concepts? Then I can see that you understand the course concepts if you use them. Then if you engage in critical thinking, then I can see that you're applying analyzing, and that's how I'd go about grading. But on the other side of this, if I were you, right, what I'd be asking the teacher is, well, does the instructor recognize my language, right? In other words, the language I use in my answers, is that matching the way that the professor is what they're looking for in their answers? Or might I be saying things in a different way? And so there's a potential for bias here, right? That the professor might not be recognizing different ways of speaking, including English language learning, or other just social ways of speaking as well, but also just the concepts might not be clear either. So the instructor might not recognize the student concepts. The student might understand the concept, it might be able to apply the concept, and the student might even be able to analyze, evaluate, and create using the concept. But if the professor doesn't recognize it, then the student wouldn't do as well. So then you start to think about the biases and what kind of shared experiences professors and students that might bias their overall grade. It might hurt students who don't come from those same backgrounds or speak the same way. So in the rubric-based learning, what we're doing here is I'm kind of revealing my hand, right? Here's my bias. It's right here in this rubric. What I'm looking for is here in this green box, and this is what, after years of teaching and looking at the materials and reading research articles about teaching and law and legal system, these are the concepts that I believe that you need to be able to show me that you understand, so that I feel good about passing you on to the next level or to the next class. And so this is kind of really you show me that you can do these things based on these kind of criteria. Do you continue to refer to your pre-existing knowledge? That, in other words, do your answers kind of seem like you're not really engaging with the material, you're not learning or understanding the material, or you're not reading the material? Do they show use of the course materials? Are you making reference to the course materials? Are you talking about it? Are you showing me that you understand how those apply? Have you evidenced this threshold concept? The malleability of law and the exercise of power are two important concepts that you have to be able to show me that you understand in order to do well in this class. Do you understand the concept of systems, right? Or are you still trying to look for the individual motives of people in their minds, as if you're a mind reader? Are you using popular opinion or things that you're getting from social media that really aren't showing me that you understand the dynamic relationships and systems? This one's harder because also, the next one is harder is because, have you learned things that you were supposed to learn already, right? So it's not my responsibility, for example, to teach you in this class the sociology of the social construction of reality, right, or unequal power relations. You really should have learned that in your intro to sociology class. For politics, right, you should really understand things like the federalist structure. You should understand the different departments of power and how those are shared and how they're overlap in the system. You should really understand the political parties. You should understand the appointment of judges. These things should have come up in your previous classes. Intro to criminal justice, right? You should understand the relationship between courts, cops, and corrections. You should have learned some theories of criminology, and you should learn that there's not just one way of viewing that. You should have learned about deviance, right? There's things that you should have learned, as well as in English and math, right? That you should have learned about probabilities. You should have learned about the scientific method. You should have learned about how to form a thesis, and all these kind of things that we take for granted, but that I'm kind of looking for and assuming because this is an upper level course. So assuming that you can do all those things, right, then what you'd be able to do is you'd apply the technical knowledge that you're gaining. So there's really specific things about the legal system, the vocabulary, kind of what many of you were learning in the diagram this last week. And then you'd be getting the kind of critical reflection that's tying in some of these concepts from previous classes in the videos, and then you'd be talking about it with each other, and so you'd be applying your learning. And then you'd be checking to see whether you're remembering and you're understanding the concepts in the quizzes and the activities. But you'd also be able to navigate the social relations that produce norms, right? The expectations and how you predict your behavior, which would include at the classroom level, right? Well, this is a different system for many of you. The college level, this might be new and you're kind of learning what it's like to be in college. but then also the general societal norms, right? What we expect from you, and how that applies to your lived experience, and how that applies to these social topics that we're talking about. And then finally, you'd reflect on this learning process, and you'd apply the knowledge to both those concrete lived experiences I just referred to, but then also these new abstract theoretical scenarios, where you'd start to see the difference between lived reality and the abstract theory. And then that's how you'd start to be able to comment on the learning process, and you'd start to recognize your own growth or how you transform over time. Now, some of the concerns that you've already had and that you've raised are, will individual students cheat by giving themselves a better grade than they deserve? And so, I put cheat and deserve in quotes here because these are your words, right? So, or these are your concepts, I should say. And so, you'd have to define, well, what would be cheating in this situation, and how would I know whether they deserve the grade they give themselves or not, right? We'd have to have some conversation about that. And I kind of asked that about, I know it'd be lovely if I was an independent, objective grader, but I've already kind of revealed my own biases and my expectations. I'm not really sure what I could do I know for a fact there's nothing I could do to completely remove my bias, and so we're trying to have a conversation about it so that you do better based on those expectations. You've also wonder, are students capable of knowing what they learned and assigning themselves a grade? You kind of framed that in the way of it's difficult to do it, so we'll have to see, right? Is that possible? And you'll have a chance to comment on that. And then one student I thought was interesting, right? Shouldn't educators keep their power over students? And so that's something to think about, right? I don't think it's an automatic yes or no. I think, again, it would have to be a deep conversation. And then, of course, I have my own concerns. I'd really prefer, right, in ungrading, if there's theories, right, that you read about in the reading that says that this increases motivation and that assignment completion will actually go up. I'd like to see proof of that. Does that actually correlate from their own point of view, from your point of view? Do you feel like you are completing more work, and do you feel like you're more motivated because you're in the driver's seat? But also, assignment completion and feeling good about the course isn't the whole thing. You also need to learn the concepts so that you do better in future classes. So do you also learn the necessary concepts? Do you develop this skill of self-learning? In the previous slide, students were unsure whether this is something you could do. So do you feel like you're now better at doing this, and can you do this in other classes? Can you just say, hey, I'm doing well? Is this system too radical for some students, right? Some students might just say, wow, this is just too different than anything I've done before, and so maybe that's intimidating. And then something that matters to me and to the college in general is that, does this result in higher outcomes for people of color? And for immigrant students, and for first in their family to go to college, and for single mothers? Does this actually make a difference at an equity level? Or is this something that just privileges a handful of students who are already probably doing well to begin with? And so these are questions that we want to keep in mind, and you'll have opportunity to talk about it and share your experiences.